Hello, everybody. Welcome back to It's Too Late to Apologize Book Reviews. I'm Stella, and today I'm doing a tag video. I was tagged by Brian over at Bookish for the evolution of the reader tag. I'll link the creator of the tag in the description box below and also Brian's video so you can check it out. 4 questions. It's all about our evolution as a reader. I'm 41 years old, so my reading tastes have changed dramatically. And I know I've mentioned that in a few videos. This will be an interesting video. And Brian, thank you for tagging me. Question number 1. What you read. How has your taste in books evolved? Oh boy, a lot. It's dramatically changed. So when I was young, read some R.L. Stine, I read some Goosebumps, R.L. Stine, some Read Your Own Adventures. I read the books that were recommended in school, so that would have been Island of the Blue Dolphins, Charlotte's Web, The Outsiders, Julie of the Wolves, James and the Giant Peach. I didn't really read James and the Giant Peach, but those were the things that I read while I was in elementary school. I didn't have any friends that were readers. I loved to read, but I didn't really have any friends that were readers, so it wasn't like they could tell me I could see what they were reading. No one in my family was a reader, so finding books to read were actually really difficult because you'd go to the library. There's so many books. You didn't know where to really start or what you'd even like or what I even liked. I have a pretty open personality, so I would read just about anything. The Babysitter Book Club was really popular, but those didn't really seem up my alley, so I never really ventured into those. May have been an assumption on my part. I've still never read any of those, so I have no idea what they're about. Nancy Drew, I never read any of those either. I'm not sure why I didn't get into those. Those would have been more, I think, what I might have been into at that age, but c'est la vie. And then junior high, I again just really read what was recommended to me in school. I read a bit during elementary extracurricular reading, not beyond what was recommended in class. In junior high, I really didn't read too much outside of what was recommended in class. I read a few novels. That was where I think the Choose Your Own Adventures were. I enjoyed those. Those would have been extracurricular. And then in high school, again, I always really enjoyed reading what was recommended to me in English, or language arts as we called it. We call it here in Canada. But yeah, I didn't really have any friends who were readers. So I was in this weird sort of position where I didn't know what to pick up. No one was recommending me books. My teachers didn't really have any books that they would recommend beyond what we were reading in class. Would have been nice to sort of, hey, give these a try. This is in your reading range, and maybe you would enjoy this and whatnot, but didn't really have those things. So I also used to read a ton of manga. Like, what has been sitting on my bookshelves has changed so dramatically over the years. I used to have 2 double-lined bookshelves full of manga. Yeah, so they dramatically changed. I still have like a bit of I kept a few series that I enjoyed when I was really young. I remember being in high school, and that's when manga just began to be released or available for purchase in Canada, or at least where in Alberta. And so I remember in high school sort of just devouring manga, and I loved it. And the money that I spent on manga with my little job that I had at the time. Oh man, I bought a lot and read a ton of manga. So anyway, as I said, my shelves have gone through like some really dramatic changes over the years. I maybe have about just shy of 600 books, and It's not like I've read a whole lot more than that, but my shelves are always changing. Like I always get rid of books that no longer, speak to me, or I move books on, and I sold all of the manga that I got rid of. I sold. So, anyways, it's been a big change. Once I got out of high school, I've been through post-secondary a few times, and every time I went through post-secondary, it's quite intensive, and so I didn't really do much reading while I was in post-secondary. But then in between all of those, I really enjoyed reading, and I was sort of getting back into it quite early. And I know I held it up in the thumbnail. Was one of the things that I read a lot when I was newly out of high school was a lot of young adult fiction. And so, I mean, I've read Twilight. This is one of my books. I have the whole series. This is first edition. This came out in like 2005. It was a long time ago now. I think I would have been like 24 when this came out. And I was reading a lot of young adult at the time. Young adult was just sort of like exploding. And at this time, I was getting back into reading. I would go to bookstores and sort of, again, I wasn't quite sure where to find recommendations. I didn't have any close friends who were readers. So I would sort of wander around the bookstore, and on the recommended bookshelf, I would go and see what was up on that bookshelf. That's how I discovered Twilight way back in the day, before it took off. And so I read that. I mean, it's just a diverting novel. Just that's what it was. No shade at Twilight or anything like that. But so I've read a ton of young adult, and it just, I've read romance, and I think I was never quite satisfied with a lot of those books. Some of them were good, some of them were just fun, but then, and I think I sort of gravitated a bit to romance simply because I like the psychology. I love being inside someone's head. And those romance novels never really satisfied that for me, because they tend to be quite repetitive, and it was sort of the similar plots, which isn't to say there aren't some, great romance novels. There are, but, and got a little bit into the YA dystopian fiction. And then it got to a point where I was just becoming really bored by YA at the time. It all seemed very repetitive, and it didn't have the depth I was searching for, which is no knock to YA. It's got a purpose and it's got a place, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't satisfying what I was looking for. And at a certain point, I did have a friend, but she was reading a lot of YA too, so it was sort of like I didn't have anybody to like recommend different books to me, or to step outside that genre. I was sort of slowly through finding, the best books to read, getting into things like 1984 by Orwell and dystopian fiction. And when I started this channel back a long time ago, it's like 2014 or something like that, I was reading a bit of YA still. I was starting to branch out and try different things. And I can even see when I was looking at some of the videos that I had made for this channel back in that day, I could just see I wasn't into it anymore, but I wasn't sure where else to go. And at the time, Booktube, in its early fledgling years, was very YA driven. And so even on Booktube, I found there was no variety of recommendation or booktubers putting out content that was different, so I was still not getting the recommendations or exposure to different literature that I wanted. And then I just said, you know what? I'm going to start reading some classics. I started slowly dipping my foot into classics. Some hits, some misses. It was a bit of a struggle in the beginning because the writing style is obviously quite a bit different from YA, but I was starting to find things that I liked. And I think a big turning point was 1984 by George Orwell. What was another one that was pretty early? Memoirs of a Geisha. I absolutely loved Memoirs of a Geisha. Anytime I would encounter like a movie that was based on a book, I would always try to read the book. And so just like slowly moving more towards classic and literary fiction. And that's where I really started to find my groove and discovering some more like adult science fiction. I was really starting to enjoy where my reading tastes were going and starting to discover book lists recommendation book lists that I would find online. I mean, the internet just used to be a really different place like 17 years ago. It was just a really different place, right? Now you can find book recommendations everywhere. Before Goodreads, before the diversity that we see now in Booktube, I wasn't really sure like where to find other book recommendations. And I then discovered at some point Cliff over at Better Than Food Book Reviews. And he really recommended all these books I had never heard of. Never heard of. And it really started me down this road of completely changing my reading taste and what I was attracted to and what I wanted to pick up and all that kind of stuff. So it's really now majority of what I read is our classics, literary fiction, modern classics, and I'm really enjoying it. And it's completely different. I find it really interesting to talk about how dramatically my taste has changed, and it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy to think about. Question number 2, how you read. Has the format of your reading changed much? So, old enough to be reading before e-readers were ever a thing. See, I have like a Kobo. I have like a Kobo e-reader. It's dead. I haven't charged this in a while. I only use this when I'm traveling. I prefer to read physical books. I guess another way it's not technically reading, but it's very similar. I also enjoy, recently within the last maybe 3 years, I've gotten into audiobooks also while I'm doing certain things around the house or go for a long bike ride or whatever the case may be. I really enjoy audiobooks. And so I listen to most of my audiobooks through free app LibriVox. I'll link it down below for anybody who's interested. There's all the classics that are in the public domain you can find on there. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful resource for free audiobooks, audiobooks can be very expensive. I used to have a job where I would drive a lot. I would travel about 50% of my time. And in the beginning, in the early years, I used to drive a lot. And I would always get audiobooks from the library so that I would have something to listen to. That was back when it was on CDs or cassette tapes. Oh, back in the days. But yeah, I would love listening to audiobooks, and I do more of that now, which is really great and I really enjoy. Question number 3, how much do you read? Do you read more, less than previously? Has how often you read changed? So I would say within the last 3 years that I have been reading more generally. I do a Goodreads reading challenge every year, and the last several years I've been hitting 40 books every single year. Before that, I've had years where I've just read 20 books or maybe just fallen short of my 40 book goal every year. So I would say that I definitely have been reading a bit more in the last 3 years or so than usual. And then question number 4, how has Booktube changed you as a reader? Booktube is probably the reasons that I am the reader I am today. And it has really helped in exposing me to books that I never would have heard of before, hearing other people's perspectives about the books that I read, and getting a whole lot more enjoyment out of books than I had in the past, because there is such enjoyment to gain out of talking or hearing people discuss the books that they read, why what their thoughts were, what they liked, what they disliked, getting this big variety of ideas and thoughts and opinions on the books that people read. And that has made such a huge difference. At one point never would have had the idea that it would have made such a big difference. It has been a huge game changer, and I'm really, really grateful for it. It's a really fantastic nook in the internet. I'm really happy that I found it and that it's evolved into what it is now, because it's fantastic. There's some really great people out here making some wonderful content, and really grateful for it, and it's absolutely fantastic. And question number 5 is tag a few people. So I'm gonna tag Michael K. Vaughan, I'm gonna tag the Falcon, and I'm gonna tag Bart over at Book Rising with Bart. You've all been tagged. If you feel like it, you can do this tag. Please like and subscribe so more people can join the conversation in the comments and find some great books. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.